Hey, welcome to another episode of Liberated Conversations. Again, I am super duper excited to have not one special guest, but two special guests today. I have Ms. Thornhill and Principal Shaq from ChicagoQuest High School. Ms. Thornhill is a history and social studies teacher, and I'll give her plenty of time to tell about herself. And Shaq is like the revitalization principal of the century. I got to witness that firsthand at ChicagoQuest High School. So one, I just want to start off by saying I am so thankful to have both of you giving me some time after I'm sure a very busy work day, remote working situation in the middle of a pandemic. So I just appreciate the time. And where I want to go to start first before we dive into questions and conversation, but think this is important. Like I just said, we have been in a pandemic for 9 plus going on plus months now. And it has caused a lot of changeover in the way we do work, the way we live, and all these things. So I just think it's important for me to want to just check in with you. Like, how are you doing today? How you feeling? Like, and you can be real with me. If it's not one of them days, like it's not. We have them, and if it's a good day, I'm glad for it. So, how you feeling today, Miss Thornhill?
I'm feeling pretty good. It's almost break, which is probably part of the reason why I'm feeling pretty good. But I taught all of my classes today, and I got to see students, which just hearing their voices just makes my day. So today was a good day.
Okay, awesome. What about you, Principal Shaq?
I'm busy and looking forward to some break time but really excited to first of all be here talking to you, but also really excited to be a leader in this space where we get to be super innovative, when we get to think outside the box, and we really get to make decisions that are right for kids right now.
Absolutely. I think you pressed on something that's really important to the Liberated team, is really just thinking about like, there's no reason we should come out of COVID-19 the same way that we went in, the way that we are educating and supporting and serving students and families. And that's really what brings us here today with this liberated conversation. Like, we just deeply believe that these authentic conversations around the work that we do are necessary to really push all of our thinking, because it's some good, bad, and ugly that comes with this work. But I think all of our like purpose is sitting in the same place, but how do we get there, and how do we challenge ourselves to do it differently? Because it could easily fall back to the way we've done it before. So yeah. So I know a lot about you both because I've had a lot of great experiences with you at ChicagoQuest High School, but I'm pretty sure all of our viewers would love to know just a little bit more about you. Like, how did you get into education? Like I always say, this was not my first job. I was going to be president of the United States, and I ended up in education. I think because I wanted to serve people. But Ms. Thornhill, maybe we could just start off with you. Like, tell us a little bit about your journey through and to education.
Awesome. So I'm originally from Maryland. I moved to Chicago about 5 years ago now. I've always wanted to be an educator. I actually wanted to be an elementary school teacher, which people are always, they understand because I'm full of energy and I love kids, but not little kids. So more power to the elementary school teachers. I don't know how you do it, especially right now. But I've been a huge history nerd my whole life. I just geek out all of that. And I had really amazing history teachers throughout my middle and high school years. And then through into college, it just really spoke to me. You can just explain so much of the world that's happening today, unfortunately, with things that have happened in the past. And I want to spark that same love of learning with my students.
I love that. There's so much that you can say now that's connected to history. I actually just saw a meme that said, with all the things that we're going through, we better be in the next part of the Bible because we have so much to talk about that is happening to us right now. So we definitely know this is going to be at least in our history book. So
we need to be in the New Testament.
New Testament. So yes. But yes, and shout out to I was a third grade teacher, Miss Thornhill. So the babies got a special spot, but being at Quest definitely made me like high school kids. A lot more comical, I'll say.
They are.
What about you, Principal Shaq? The people would love to know about Principal Shackelford.
Yes. So I came into education accidentally. But I am a part of a family of educators, which is why I thought I would never become one. But it's in the genes, and it was, something was in the water, and I drank it and figured out that I was actually pretty good at this teaching thing. And so I started teaching straight out of college at 21. Some school district gave me a set of kids and a set of textbooks and said, good luck. And that was all the training that I got. And so it was really trial by fire for me, but I realized that, first of all, I really enjoyed being in front of a group of kids who were curious, who were inquisitive, who wanted to know things. And I wanted to share what I knew. But I also realized that there was some really huge inequities in our public education system. And I realized that really early on in my life, which is a whole nother story, but also just early in my career, I began to notice the disparaging differences between the type of education that I got growing up in a small upper middle class town where I was usually the only Black kid in the class. And between that and the education that my students were getting where I was teaching. And I just knew that there was just some unjust things going on in our country. And I moved to Chicago because I wanted to learn more. And I found a really amazing master's degree program at DePaul. And I learned so much about just the inequities and just the foundations of education and how we got here, who gets educated, who gets the type of education, and why. What is that supposed to reproduce? Who is that supposed to create? And how those inequities continue to just develop over time. So I became an educator because I saw that there was something unfair amiss, and I wanted to do something about it.
Love that. It's definitely some like freedom fighter feels when it comes to education space. Seriously, I mean, you definitely see it, and I know you spoke about a small town, and it's very interesting when we look across this country. The inequities of way students are served can change not just from town to town, but literally block to block.
Yep.
And in some cases, building to floor to floor. So just how quickly those things and how the history of education, like I just always remind myself that, like, how do we expect so much change so fast when a system was designed and created once and not even allow us in a school? Like, there was no learning allowed. So we think that is so long ago, and it really is not. But I'm glad like the conversations are happening now to really push people outside of their comfort zone, because our kids have been uncomfortable for a very, very long time. But like what you both shared, and it seems like, coming from the West Coast and coming from Maryland and coming to Chicago, and you ended up at ChicagoQuest High School.
We sure did.
So
couldn't stay away.
Couldn't. So I know you both have like some just history with ChicagoQuest, whether it's in the classroom or like serving as an administrative coach and support and then leading the school. But like between the two of you, could you just share a little bit about ChicagoQuest High School? Like people may not know it. It's a small gym in Lincoln Park, but tell us about your great school.
You can start that one.
Okay. So ChicagoQuest is the only school I've worked in Chicago. It's my home, it's my family. It's a really important part of my journey of who I am. But CQ in itself, in my time, in the 5 years that I've been there, and its short lifespan as a school in general, has gone through many iterations. When I first started, it was the end of the game-like learning model that they were in, which sounds awesome. I never was there when they were actually doing the things, but I think there was also a reason why it didn't persist as long as they had hoped it would. I was there during a STEM school focus, which as a history teacher kind of like rocked me to my core. But I still try to incorporate science and math and engineering into my class as much as I could. More of a college prep focus, and moving into project-based learning this year. The biggest thing I can say about CQ and in my time there, which I'm sure we'll get into, there's been a lot of narratives about CQ that have bases in truth, and also a lot of narratives that are just based off preconceived notions of particular students or just of what people have heard in the community. It's a very small school, a very tight-knit community feel within the school and among the family, the stakeholders, everyone involved. But it's a school where you can see evident in how we've tried to make so many changes, where there's a true passion and a commitment to the students and the success of the students among teachers, staff, parents, everyone involved.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. My relationship with ChicagoQuest is rather tumultuous. It comes in many facets and has many branches to it. But I began working with Quest directly as a culture coach for the school leaders who were there. I was invited to Quest to really try to figure out the best pathway to create a culture where students and adults felt safe, and that made room for learning. And at the time, it was not. It just wasn't that place. It was an inconsistent, unstable environment that made it very difficult for teaching or learning to happen on a consistent basis. And so I tried to work with with two different administrators who were in the building to over time to change that environment into something that would be academically stable. And neither one of those leaders could pull it off. And I think they were well-intentioned. I think they had their strengths, but changing a culture was not one of them. And so here I am in the chair of the school leader in a pandemic. But what has always kept me close to Quest is that there's just something about the school, and I could never name it. I could never put my finger on it, but it was something about the school, and there was something about the kids in that school that just really tied it. It was a bond. And so for 4 years, 3.5, 4 years, I worked parallel to the school with the administrators there, and I just couldn't leave it. And something of, the universal forces just kept me tied to the school and kept me close, so I could keep a pulse on what was going on, and always in the back of my mind formulating a pathway to greatness for the school. And it was 1.5 years ago that I was put into the seat to make that happen. And I feel, and I don't know if anyone else would contradict this or, support this, but I feel that before the pandemic closed our school, we were heading in a really good direction, and we were in a space that was, you could feel the tide changing there. And so I'm really disappointed and disheartened that we are closing in this way, because I just know that we would have seen some real fruits of our labor.
Wow. I mean, I definitely, Shaq, I will say, I think your tie to Quest is steeped in your belief that all those students have the possibility and the potential for change. Like, that's just like a deep belief, right? And I think that is the pull in that kept you at a school. I always call you Shaq is like the Joe Clark of Quest. So, but you all made me think of something I want to like dig into. Ms. Thornhill, you talked about like this commitment from staff, and Shaq, you talked about like the change. So what are these things that had to occur, or what maybe you've seen, Ms. Thornhill, maybe you've seen, Shaq, what have you all collaborated on to create commitment through change? When you've seen a series of changeover in administrators and at a school and high turnover of teachers, like how do you reinstill that commitment to through change for student outcomes, right? Like all those things at the same time.
Okay. So as far as like the staff goes, as you mentioned, we've definitely had some turnover in the past, pretty significant turnover. But the last few years, it's decreased significantly. And I think that just stems from the staff, including administration's ability to really like get to know each other. We spend time with each other, not now, but previously outside of the school day. We get to know each other on a personal level. And that stems to with the students as well. Like we have always had this kind of mentality, like with our morning advisory, or just when kids entered into the building, they would see certain people and we could just see how they were doing. And we would communicate with each other like, hey, so-and-so's not having the best day or whatever. And like that sense of community we have among the staff ensures that we're doing everything we can to really reach the students where they are and how they enter into our building. And I think that's part of how we're able to ensure that everything that we're doing has the most optimal potential for the students to be successful.
I have to unmute. So I was actually just thinking about that with Thornhill this morning about, and I don't know why my mind was running other than the fact that I miss the normalcy, I guess, of being inside of a high school. Not that that's normal for everyone, but it's definitely normal for us. But I just miss how we used to start our days off, and standing in the front entryway, watching kids, walk in, greeting them, giving them a high five, kind of joking with them on some levels that made them know that we knew them, and being just there, just chitting and chatting in the front with other adults. And I mean, we just really had a space that was welcoming to everyone there. But I was thinking about that and just really missing that familial space that we had in the mornings. And yeah, it's just so different now. You're going to have to repeat the question. My children were having they love me and I am so blessed, but.
Look, we're giving everybody grace right now. We are still in a pandemic. I don't think people realize that. Like, this is not going to be perfect. All right. Kids are welcome into this conversation. No, I was asking about maybe from your lens on leadership of like, what did that look like in the space of Ms. Thornhill talked about commitment, like staff commitment, creating that sense of community. But like, how do you do that through all the change that has occurred? Like, that can be extremely difficult for staff, for students. Like, what was that like for you as a leader to come in and create this, like the feeling of stability, I'll say?
I was really lucky because I had worked with the staff and I was familiar and had some relationships with some of the students already in the building when I took over the school. And so I was in a different situation than maybe someone from the outside coming in. It was still tough. I still had to really build relationships, and I still had to try to be as transparent as possible, and really try to build trust, especially with the adults, with the staff, because they had seen over the course of time so many different leaders come in and make these different changes and just kind of radicalize decision making and creating these kind of spaces of chaos that was really unsettling. And they had experienced that over and over again. And so I didn't want to be that person to create that chaotic space again. And so I really tried to make sure that people knew me as a human being, as a person. I tried to be as humble as I could. I tried to be as honest as I could. And most of all, and most importantly, like, my word was bond. And so if I made a decision or if I said this is the rule, I made sure I stuck with it because in the past there had been so much wavering in that area that I knew that that was the only way that I was going to be able to build trust.
That, I mean, that's hard. Like, that's hard to stick to it, right? Like,
Yes.
and to get a group of adults on the same page, because it's almost like in a school, it's like having multiple mothers and fathers, and that kid is seeking out that parent who's going to tell them what they want to hear, like to get that right Christmas gift or whatever it is.
Right.
And you talked about like this creating this sense of like a welcoming environment. But I want to take a step back before that welcoming environment was created. Like you started to talk about what this old Quest was like whether it was behavior, whether it was attendance, whether it was like culture amongst adults. Can you speak a little bit about what was that culture like, Ms. Thor? Like you walked in the middle of it, Shaq, you took over in the middle of it. What did it take, and what did it look like for the team to create those systems and structures that were welcome? And I'll give you kind of a little preface around where my mind is going. We talk a lot about the power of the gaze, and this comes from Dr. Eberhardt's book, Bias. I think that's what it's, Bias. And when she talks about the power of the gaze, it talks about the ability for adults or systems, the way that they choose to view students and serve students has incredible power on the way that students ultimately view themselves and what they become in the world. So you talked about like the quick change and how adults kind of treated students, and that's why it was X, Y, and Z, which I'll let you describe. But for leaders who are currently going through that right now, because there are probably many and plenty when we talk about climate and culture, because that's not everyone's strong suit. Like, what do those structures and systems look like to create and hold adults accountable to viewing and serving students in a welcoming, loving sort of way?
I could tell you what I intended to do, but maybe Ms. Thornhill could talk a little bit about how it actually landed.
So I can go over sort of like where CQ was when I first started. So I was a mid-year hire. I was hired in October of 2016, and the teacher that I replaced wasn't doing much in the classroom. So I got a lot of kids really trying to see how far they could go with me, and many days where I was like, what am I doing? But I think that group graduated last year. But something that really worked for me from the beginning and really helped with my classes is I just consistently told them that like they deserved to learn the curriculum. I'm sorry that your teacher showed you Red Tails for 2 weeks, two straight weeks of school, but we're not doing that because you deserve to get the best education you can, and I'm going to do what I can to ensure that happens. Yeah. And I promised them that I would be there until the day they graduated, which I was. But I think that like the consistency piece of it, the amount of kids who were like, you're not even going to make it to the end of the year, or are you going to stay to the end of the year? Because they just had so much turnover in just their freshman year of high school, and it was October. And that's traumatic for students. And so
anyone.
For anyone, exactly. And to the staff, to lose staff members mid-year throughout the year, just in general, is traumatic for everyone in the building. And it's hard on the teachers and the students. And I think a lot of the behavior issues that we struggled with when I first started stems from that. And the just not having the consistency that kids need and deserve. And I wrote down what you said about the ability to choose and view students and how you serve students. And that's just like perfect to the examples that I saw my first year. Like there were some great, amazing teachers, and those were the classrooms where I was like 100% everything was where it needed to be. And then you had the classrooms where the teachers just didn't care. Or they were there to do their 2 years or whatever it was, and you could tell. And I think that through the time that I've been at CQ, we've grown into a teaching staff that really cares about the students, but also cares about what they're teaching to students and sees value in it and sees value in the students. And I think that has really helped with the overall culture of the school. But when I first started, like we had multiple fights in the building, outside the building, in the street, like a lot what was going on, and I think the restructuring and really focusing on the culture in the building and putting in restorative justice practices. And the biggest thing for me as a teacher, and I think that really something that CQ really strives to work on, is our relationships we build with students and with their families. Like people would know certain people to come to, like my previous advisory. If there was an issue with one of my girls, you called me. You asked me because I could talk to that student, or I needed to know what was going on because I had that relationship with that student. And that's how we were able to quell certain things before it got to a space where we needed to get outside people to come in and help, or students needed to be reprimanded or suspended. And I think that part of why we've gotten to this place of change and this place of where we've revitalized is because of the relationships that we've made and the ability to remain consistent as a school.
Love that. I mean, that's critical, right? Relationship building is serious. It's work. It just don't happen because you're human and you feel like you look good and you felt nice that day. Especially when students have that sense of turnaround. It's like, we don't even know the level of turnaround they have in their everyday life. And then you come to school and you have this again. It's like, what is this? Who can I trust? And it just feels good to hear like the intentionality around the staff to build that sense of trust and to understand I'm not going to crack through to every student immediately, and I'm not going to take it personal. But if I need to call Miss Thornhill because she has spent that time and done the work with this student, and Miss Thornhill will do the same thing, vice versa. Super powerful. Sorry, Chad.
No, that's fine. I mean, the turnover and turmoil was not just happening, you know, the year that Miss Thornhill got there in 2016. It happened every year subsequent after that. And it was just devastating to watch. It was, for me, particularly because I had applied to be the principal in 2016. And the first time I stepped into the school, I was standing in the hallway during a transition period to lunch. And, you know, there was the chaos in the hallways and the kids cursing and just a lot of mess happening in the hallways. And once all of that cleared out, just as a lone visitor standing in the hallway, there were 2 students left in the hallway, 2 female students, and one of them was literally choking out the student in the hallway. And so, you know, I rush over, another adult rushes over, and they separated the 2, and then the kids went to lunch. And as someone who really thrives on rules, regulations, structure, I looked at the adults and I immediately knew that things like this happened all the time. And I knew it happened all the time because adults did not know what to do in those situations, because they had been given so many different ways of managing, and nothing had ever stuck. And I thought, kids deserve better than this. They deserve better than this. And during that interview, I told the interview team, I would not touch academics at all. I would spend all of my time fixing this culture. And they did not like that answer, because as an instructional leader, as a principal, you're supposed to come in and you're supposed to have all of these great ideas about how you're going to increase test scores and assessment. And I said to them, you can't even start learning until you make this a place where it's safe to learn. And so I didn't get the job. That was 5 years ago.
They're probably really good at themselves now. So
I stepped in and I did what I said I was going to do 5 years ago. Because I meant it. It was true. It was absolutely true. And after being able to really focus on trust and relationship building and creating a space where students feel safe to be themselves, and where they have consistent adults in their lives who know them and know their families, it was then that I was able to say, now I want to increase the rigor. I want AP for everyone, even those students who have diverse learning needs. I want to change the structure and have this be a project learning school where students are working as if they are in the real world. Who goes to work and sit in compartments all day and then move around to your next compartment the next hour and you work with a different set of people and then the next hour. No one does that.
Yeah.
We work on project management and production all day, but we don't teach our kids that. And so I knew that like we could do some really amazing things, but we just had to get a hold of the chaos that was happening in the school.
Wow, you really got my mind running and turning in so many different directions right now. I want to dive into like this culture piece, this curriculum piece. Like, this is school, right? So I maybe this will be a shorter one, then I get to the second part of this. But like, you talk about culture and like where it is. I know we're remote, but some of the standard things that Quest has, and one thing that I want to highlight and kind of hear you, both of your think is around, and what has this significantly meant for you and for the students of the school is that you are in the city of Chicago and your students come from the South Side and the West Side, and that comes with a lot of bias that people have and assumptions that they have about students that come from those geographical areas in Chicago. And they migrate or they commute every day into a more affluent, very affluent neighborhood that's not too far from that Magnificent Mile and all this luxury life. But very interestingly, your school has no metal detectors. You have no school resource officer. And even walking into a space where you said was a little chaotic, behavior was off the chain, a child was getting choked out. Like, what does that signify for students and staff and people who even question you about why don't you have it? And what has that then turned out to be for students?
So Chicago was very different than the education landscape from where I came. I grew up in the Bay Area. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a small town. I was usually the only Black representative in the group. And so coming to Chicago to learn about urban education, I learned while I was in graduate school. I was subbing around the city of Chicago. So I got to see a number of different schools on the South Side, on the West Side. And so I was just blown away by the structures that were in place that seemed that they were definitely setting kids up for jail. I mean, there was definitely this school to prison pipeline that I saw. And at the time I didn't really have that terminology to hold on to, but I saw it. And so to have to walk into a school where there's metal detectors and there's police officers, I was working in a school after school program and walked into the main office to get some paperwork and saw a child on the floor with the police's knee in his back and he's being handcuffed. And I was shocked that this school here. And I said, this cannot be school for young people, no matter where they come from, no matter what their parents do for a living. This does not make sense. And so I knew that I would never want to work in a school where there were metal detectors and where there were armed officers walking around with handcuffs on and with bulletproof vests on, because that would not have been okay for me. And that's definitely not okay for my children. So why would that be the case for anyone else's child in my care? And we have proven that we don't need them. We don't need them. And that's not to say that our kids don't come to school with some kind of protection, because they are coming from hours away on multiple modes of public transportation. They are crossing multiple gang lines within their own communities. So they definitely know how to survive. They are street savvy. But they also know that this place here, my school, is where I can actually let my guard down a little bit, and I don't need to pull these other pieces of physical protection out here. And that's what I wanted to make sure was happening at Quest.
I mean, yeah, I'll let you go ahead, Ms. Thornhill.
Similarly to Shaq, I grew up, which I've only realized now, that I lived in a rural area. I thought it was, but it's very rural. But anyway, went to a rural high school myself, so there were no metal detectors. We had like a school resource officer that was shared among schools, but was really only there for like football games, basketball games, kinds of things like that. And that was my only real experience with having police officers in school buildings. A couple years ago, we did I don't remember what it was called, but we went into different selective enrollment schools and we're doing these kind of like professional learning observations for ourselves as a PD. And I saw metal detectors for the first time in schools in my entire like educational experience in the last 25 years. Like,
I thought you walked into an airport, huh?
Yeah, I was like, what? And I mean, I've heard that they have them in schools in the city, but we don't have them. And I maybe this was my own thinking, but I was like, this is a selective enrollment school. Like, why do you even have these here? Why are there police officers or police officer-esque security in the front of the building? That makes me as a visitor not feel safe or not feel.
I've been in a CPS school where they're actually using the the X-ray machines for their backpacks. So they're sliding those through, and I'm thinking, where's TSA? I mean, where's the dog? Where's, and
that's something that
every day.
I really commend CQ for. I don't know if that's something else that's similar in our network schools, but I really commend our school in that. Not like Shaq saying, like, I'm sure there are things, but I think that there's a feeling of established safety and trust for our students in our building with the fact that we don't have that. And it's something that I think makes the students feel more comfortable coming into the building that way as well. And then to speak to your other part of your question, Mr. Shannon, I think something else. Sorry. Something else about what you would ask in the question about like the neighborhood in particular and like our students who travel from the south and west side. I don't know if we're going to get into this later, but we do have some students who live around the school. And I mean, when our school is literally, if you look on Google Maps, it still says Cabrini Green. Regardless if it's Lincoln Park or not, it's Cabrini Green. And even in the last decade, it looked significantly different than it does now. And I think that our students, and more so than the school that we share our building with, has a different narrative and perception of our students in that neighborhood than is necessary and what actually is happening because of what the Lincoln Park Cabrini Green neighborhood has transformed itself into recently.
Oh, so I mean, it makes me think, guys, all those that's watching, if you check out, I can only say this one time, Candyman this summer. Whenever it comes out, you might see a little people of ChicagoQuest in the background.
You might.
Film right behind it in the same community that once was, and it probably tell more about that story than Miss Thornhill was talking about. But that's the only time you're gonna catch me saying that name. I'm still terrified as a child.
Don't say it more than once.
It gets too risky after that. No, I think that's like powerful, right? Like just thinking about both what you shared. When we think about this metal detector being inside of the building and having to go through that every single day, like this does not just represent like TSA in the airport, it definitely represents like this prison mentality. And like when we think about it, many of the schools start metal detectors at kindergarten. Like, can you imagine having pre-K or K in your building where you have to take your backpack every day and put it through a screener or get wound down, and just to be able to hear a high school that has had some behavior and some culture problems, and we always, I'll say this before I get to the rest of my point. The culture problem is sometimes placed on the students, like that's the belief, like. Yep. But this made it very clear that the culture is not a student problem; it's an adult problem inside of schools, and it goes back to the way that we choose to view and we serve them. Like by viewing them as humans that I trust, you don't need to have a metal detector inside of this building because I trust and I believe in you to come in here every day as you are. You might be mad, but you know this is a safe space, and that's what we would want, even in the work environment. Like we have the ability to say, I'm mad. I'm gonna take a sick day, or because I'm sick, I'm so mad. Or take a personal day where kids don't necessarily get that. Right. They so many days they can miss in the school year, but then we're hounding them, right? we gotta call them, guys. Andrew at school, like, can I be sick today, y'all? Can I not feel well? You know, and it just, I always speak about like the type of work environment that I would want is the same type of learning environment I would want to provide for kids. I do want to couple the curriculum piece. I think this is important. Ms. Thornhill, you talked about what the old teacher used to show all the time and understanding the demographics of the students that you serve. One, building relationships with them, because we can assume identities about a student until they're comfortable enough to share all of their identities. But how do you incorporate the identities of students into your instruction to inform them, make it affirming, to make it informational, to make it engaging, that they can actually see themselves? Because like me, I don't see Christopher Columbus when I look at Europe. Like there are probably some other people I can see, but it ain't Mr. Columbus, like from a number of reasons. But how do you bring in like their student identities into a space of learning, and maybe you could tie that into like the project-based learning work that you're kind of incorporating across the campus?
Sure. Yeah. So like I mentioned, I'm a history teacher. I really try to be as culturally responsive in my pedagogy as possible. And representation of my students is really important, but it goes further than just the pictures on my walls. Mm-hmm. So the beauty of a charter school, and of our school in particular, is I have some autonomy over my curriculum. And I really try to do interest inventories and things at the beginning of the year to really see what the kids are interested in. We've been reading a book as a staff where we really take the currencies of the students and what currencies they bring into the classroom and teach them and educate them from where they are and acknowledge the currencies that they already have and see value in them and see how we can help them to succeed past those. But for myself in particular, I really, the biggest thing for me, and especially for this year, my goal for myself, given that this is their last year of CQ, is to make this their best year in history or their favorite history class they've ever taken. I think that trying to relate things to what matters to them, try to relate things to current events or what's relevant to the world today as much as I possibly can while still fitting into the curriculum and standards that are needed. I really try to make sure that Black History Month is not just February, but it's all year. We have a demographic of African-American students, Latinx, Hispanic students, as well as a small Asian population. So really trying to include information and history and activists of all different backgrounds, and not focusing on just the demoralizing or negative pieces of their history, but also the triumphs of their history as well, and really arming them with the knowledge to have conversations. And I really try to lean into those difficult conversations. I understand my place as a white woman and understanding that like I can guide these conversations or give you discussion protocols, but it's not my place to talk about the Black experience or the Latinx experience or Asian experience. But just making sure that we have the ability to have a academic discourse as well. And I think that my biggest thing for this year is I really want my students to leave the classroom with the idea that it's okay to question authority. You should want to question everything and really try to find the information that is true and makes the most sense for you. Just with the breadth of misinformation and fake news everywhere in the world today.
The adults are putting out too. So.
Yeah, that's why I constantly tell them, if I say something that makes you uncomfortable, if something that I say does not sound right, check me, because I am human and I make mistakes myself, which they love to do. Okay. But I really try to ensure that it's not the history class that I learned when I was in school, rather more the things I learned when I was in college and the things that I'm learning myself to really make sure that it's the real history that our kids need and deserve.
Love that. I mean, that's important. I mean,
yeah.
Shouldn't teachers want to learn at the same time as well? Like, if I already know it, I ain't giving you nothing new and interested in entertaining. Like,
there's so much out there. Yeah. I mean, I can fill the world with what I don't know. So yeah. I'm trying to fill my cup. And for your viewers and listeners, if you want a really amazing lesson on racist maps, you need to hit Miss Thornhill up. Okay. It is my favorite lesson that she does. And I had no idea. I learned something mind-blowing. Hit Miss Thornhill up, racist maps. It's amazing.
We might have to bring you back to walk us through this in Thornhill.
I love it. My favorite lesson.
I'll hold you to it.
It's a little plug, a little plug. You know, I mean, there's a lot of buzzwords being thrown out right now. In some ways, I appreciate the conversations that are being had, and I appreciate people trying to grapple with some really tough ideas and information. But you know, for me, school is about learning, and learning in a number of different ways, not just learning from a textbook or learning from a scope and sequence that someone, you know, states away put together 10 years ago. But it's about really being curious, and I found that our kids just aren't curious anymore. And so one of the ways that I, you know, fight racism, like, you know, everyone's talking about being anti-racist and biases and all of these, you know, different buzzwords and terms that are going around right now. But the type of learning is, and freeing up the type of learning that our students are getting to take out the structures and the strongholds that we have on them right now, or have traditionally, is truly anti-racist to me. So like, how do we fight racism in this country? We change the narrative, we change the story, and we produce something completely different than what has been allowed to be produced in the past. And so we're reading stamped right now with our whole school. So our students are reading stamped, our teachers are reading stamped. Ms. Thornhill and I are collaborating on our own curriculum. So we're writing it as we go, and creating spaces for really tough conversations to be had, but also just for a different way of looking at things, having a different perspective on the world, on the United States, who we are, how we got here, and then giving students the opportunity to ask questions, but then to like be able to forge their own paths using the information that they have. I wanted to increase AP. I wanted to increase advanced placement in the school and offer it to everyone so that everyone had the opportunity at a rigorous curriculum and be able to participate in some really tough conversations and discussions. And that is anti-racist to me. That is creating a world where at one time was not open to students, all students, and being able to say, no, you deserve the opportunity to also be involved in some very tough conversations, be able to grapple with some very high order thinking. You deserve that.
Yes.
And I don't have to put on my anti-racist shirt or, you know, have, you know, go out into the streets and protest and yell that I'm anti-racist, because I feel that my work is anti-racist.
Woo. Come on, you better preach a word, Shat. You are. No, I mean, Lord, it got me thinking like, one thing about school is how we measure sometimes success or the climate and culture of a school, but about how quiet it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it just got me thinking that from what Ms. Thornhill shared about the conversations that have to happen in your entire school reading step together, like school should not be quiet. Right? Like it should be a space of dialogue and ongoing conversation and pushing and pulling and learning and all those things that have to happen, because if we truly want to make this an anti-racist space, it has to allow students to build the confidence to then navigate a post-secondary world, right? Like I say it all the time, for me, the reason I am successful on the paper end, I'll say, like getting the degrees, is because I learned quickly how to navigate white spaces. So I became like the token one, right? In certain rooms and spaces, when I know so many people were probably just as smart or probably even smarter than I was, who could have been successful, but were not given the opportunities to access. But I think about all the work that I have to do now as an adult to unravel all the things that I had to cover up who I was in order to work in these things. It does not take away the knowledge or anything that I learned. And that's the same thing for our kids. We're trying to get them to mask who they are, to sit in the classroom, to learn something that they're not interested in, when they should be learning confidently and authentically and who they are, and still absorbing all that knowledge and processing it. And I think it just goes to your point earlier around when we talk about these anti-racist like buzzwords, right? That's the thing. We have to create space for adults to do the anti-racist things, just to do them, right? Like, don't overthink it, people. Like, just, you know what's wrong, don't do it. It does take some work. It really does. So no, I appreciate, and I definitely want to have you both back to talk more, because I think you have provided us with a wealth of knowledge of like just looking at the lens from a leader and looking from a classroom teacher and going through that experience of what some folks will call a turnaround, because you've created new systems and structure and there's better production outcome for students. When more for me, it was revitalization, because you had a staff, you had students,
had them there.
You had families who were there,
They
who
were
had
there.
all these things in them already. And it just took the systems and structures necessary to really unlock their full potential. So there are probably gonna be a lot of people knocking at your door to figure out like, how did you do this? And I would love to continue that conversation to learn more because a lot of schools are going through that. But before we close, one question we always have to close out with, like on some good high note, let's give it up to some people who have impacted our lives. I would love to hear and learn about an educator in your life, an educator in the expanded definition of however you want to take that. The person who has had made an impact on you and the work that you're doing and gotten helped you get to where you are. And why is that person so dear and important to you? Whoever got it first, like.
I'll go.
You want it?
Sure. So my favorite teacher, who I feel like has helped me to become the teacher that I am today, is a colleague of mine, Miss Curry Neal. If you want me to go into who she is?
Yeah, tell the people.
Why?
I'll tell the people. So Curry was a teacher at ChicagoQuest. I taught with her for 2 years. She was an English teacher, a college counselor, a multitude of all different things. Now she works for the CCIU program in our network, which is project-based as well, where students make social ventures. I choose her as a teacher that has been really impactful for me. She pushed me to think really critically about just who I am. And seeing her in classrooms just made me want to, I'm just obsessed. I just like cannot even, if anyone has the opportunity to ever see her teach, she's amazing and makes me want to be a better teacher every day.
Love that. Come on, peer-to-peer. Inspo.
So I'm gonna take you back to high school. My favorite teacher is Mr. Garrett. And you know what? He was not about the content more than he was just about being a good person and seeing the good in everyone who was around him, and seeing the good in all of us, even if we were, unruly teenagers at the time. I mean, I was not unruly because I had a fear for my father, but there were unruly people around me. But he always saw the best in us. And I, sitting in his class, I just always felt like I belonged someplace. And I always felt that he valued me as a human being, as a person. And so I've always tried to take that essence into this work. How do I value? How do I make people feel valued? How do I make students feel like they belong in this space, and that they are smart? Because I had a teacher who helped me do that and helped me feel that way. And that really took me through some really tough times in high school. So shout out to Mr. Garrett, Benicia High School.
Okay. Now, I mean, we see that showing up now for Mr. Garrett. Shaq, even the conversation early about having your staff reading currency, like taking a step away from that deficit mindset inside of schools, because that is what the education system teaches us, to find the gaps and fill them, as opposed to like, where are we winning at? Creating welcoming spaces, and giving everybody that sense of belonging in your school. So I definitely can see all those things coming back around, and you just have such a great team. Again, I thank you all so much for your time. I'm repping my Chicago
You
Quest.
are.
Today. But yeah, again, I thank you all for your time. Please enjoy your
Thank
holidays.
you.
Stay safe. I hope your families are good. And again, we hope to have you back on Liberated Conversation soon. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thanks.